So I had a busy work time, was making my liquid IMO. Actually, I was making a new batch of IMO3. I had run out of IMO for making my liquid IMO for spraying my trees. And so I'm making a new batch. I go to this stockpile of substrate I have because I have a lab with all my materials in it. They're all ready for me whenever I need. I just walk in there and I can make anything for my farm. And I don't, and that's really, I think, the key for natural farming. If you want to farm this way, set yourself up with a lab where everything's there. And that is getting over the hump of it feeling hard. All of a sudden, it feels easy. So the lab is the key. I'm in my lab. I got my substrate. However, it's Hawaii. And so I've got weevils now in my substrate. I pour it into my box to start mixing everything, and it's full of these little beetles.
Yeah.
They're little tiny black things in my grain. And I'm like, oh, darn it. Can I stop? And I'm like, I'm 40 minutes to where I would buy more grain. And I got a full work day and a busy farming week. And so I'm like, no, we'll just let them go. And so I make my IMO3, and it's finishing up. I'm exploring it, looking at all the chunks of fuzz and mycelium that's invaded this whole swath of material. And I see all these little white puffballs. And every time I find a weevil, they're covered in a white puffball, little fuzz, like little cotton balls. And I'm like, oh, that's interesting. Very curious. I wish I could stop and throw this all under my microscope and spend a day and a half researching it, but I don't have time right now. So I throw it in the storage bin. I make my liquid IMO, get it started. That's going out in 36 hours on the tractor. One of my staff is spraying that out. I am walking through the spray swath that my staff sprayed, just as a good farmer, observing the work and walking through the trees. How did the trees react? Did we knock off flowers? And all the things. And I see in some of the crook of the trees, I see some puffballs. I see white little puffballs on green stink bugs, which is one of our main pests. It almost took our business out before. It's this little beetle with a carapace, and it's covered in the same fuzz my weevils were covered in. And I'm like, oh, that's interesting. What's happening here? And so I could not resist. At that point, I went full dive into beetles and pathogens and all this thing, only to discover that the leading pathogen for carapace insects and beetles in general are fungi.
Mm-hmm.
And then I see some of the scale we have. We have this thing, white felted coxid, and there's little bits on our farm, but they were predated on. They were being eaten by some of the bugs, and there was also a fuzz that got on some of them. And so I logged that away. It was like, oh, okay. So I am taking cultures from the wild, and by adding a substrate that they like to eat, which is that like chitinase protein that they're multiplying in my process of turning and keeping aerobic, and that I can actually get transfer through a liquid foliar application of that pest management organism. And that was like, I was excited. I didn't tell anybody. I didn't talk about it. I was farming. And really, I didn't make any videos. I didn't teach until I was handing off my management to my younger brother and moving away from the farm, which was 2015, 2016, really 2014. I started teaching. Steve calls me up and he's like, Chris, Zimbabwe here. I've got this big, project on 300 acres, and the locusts are coming through. We're getting destroyed by grasshoppers. It's marching through the farm. It's killing my hemp project, and I got this big important field. I'm like, here's something. He's like, what can we do in natural farming? I was like, well, here's something I discovered a few years ago. Da, 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 da. And I laid out the whole thing. And I was like, so try it a couple ways here. You can try it with an IMO1 collection where you put the beetles material in that rice box that you're putting out in nature. So you're cultivating in something on food that they would like to eat, and try it like I did, that IMO3. And so he tried it both ways. He said he felt like it was more effective. He got better growth on the carapace when he did it with the IMO1, and then grew it out with IMO3. And then he sprayed his field with the liquid IMO from this, and he had grasshopper die off and then prevention. The rest of the farm continued to get the pressure and got eaten by a lot of grasshoppers. And his section that he sprayed, this hemp project that he sprayed with liquid IMO, with the IPMO in it, he had no more damage, and he went full crop, no damage. So since then, we've played with it. Other people have played with it on their farms, and we've had very similar success where we can wildcraft Bavaria bassiana. Bavaria bassiana is all over the world. It's in all kinds of places. We find it in so many soil types. It's slightly different than the one they made for the lab. It's a patented product because it's a specific strain. However, not all of it's exactly DNA the same. And so there's indigenous versions, but then there's also things that predate, that are predatory to beetles that aren't that specific microbe. There's lots of other things that eat it. And so it's simple tech. It's a very, and it's again back to that, what is the food source we're providing to cultivate the microbe we want?